This is Harley,
This is Darius.
and we are reviewing the 1995 version of The Scarlet Letter.
So in the book, we can see Hester is independent and strong as she copes with the isolation that has been imposed on her, and she is also independent and strong in the movie, but there are some major differences, which include the fact that in the movie, she's seen as trouble right from the start, and someone tells her you would do well to use less lace, and so right from the start you can see society's judging her.
Yeah, and I think that despite, her using lace in her garments, that she kind of has a masculine quality in the movie because she does so many things by herself and she's always reading, and at one point she's asked, like, shouldn't your husband be doing this for you? And, the wearing of the lace kind of is masculine because she is not afraid to show her sexuality, which is viewed even by today's standards as something only okay for men to do. So
She's also almost as like a damsel in distress in the movie, and towards the end it's almost as if um, Joffe tries to mold the Hawthorne story to the typical Hollywood movie.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, it doesn't really take Hawthorne's purpose into consideration.
So in the story, Dimmesdale plays a huge role by highlighting how guilt and shame eats away at him, and it's largely caused by the rules of society, and it shows how powerful a society can be in causing damage to individuals.
Yeah, and his guilt in the movie is definitely less amplified than in the novel because he is aware of Chillingworth's true identity. So that's especially shown in the scaffold scene at the end, where instead of confessing and having this big scene and his symbol, whatever that might be on his chest, be exposed, instead in the movie he is kind of setting himself up for a happily ever after with Hester.
He doesn't struggle as much with the guilt as he does in the story, and he doesn't have a scarlet letter on his chest. He also seems to. He also once, um, when he spoke with Hester, uh, it seems that he maintains his secrecy for Hester because she tells him that it would deny my right to stand up against hypocrisy if Dimmesdale say, did confess to the crime.
Right, like, he seems to protect her more than himself in the book. No,
Yeah.
that's not right. In the movie. So, and that goes back to, I think, how Hester tells him about Chillingworth and how um, Chillingworth isn't able to play his role as effectively in the movie because he can't cause as much deterioration in Dimmesdale because he's not given that power, and that kind of makes the characters seem more shallow because they don't have as much quality in them because you can't see the mental or physical deterioration as much in Dimmesdale in the movie. You can see it like when he's up at the scaffold at night and he like sticks the nail in his hand, but that's not caused by Chillingworth. And Chillingworth with the Native Americans, I think that played an interesting role on him.
Um, in the movie, his relationship with the Native Americans is used to help um, show how evil he's become. The Native American cast him out of their society because he's too savage for them, while um, in those times the Native Americans were considered the most savage people there were. And so it kind of shows how the movie was showing how someone who appears to be civilized could actually be very evil and um, menace, as much of a menace as Hester and Dimmesdale, even though he didn't commit a crime like they did.
Right. And that's also shown, I would say, in the book when in the forest at the end, they're saying how Chillingworth's crimes were more of a sin than theirs, even, because that goes back to how he is so sinister and how he is evil. He's more evil than the Native Americans. And the movie, although in the book there wasn't direct Native American, influences, I think it's interesting how the movie kind of tried to show how evil he was through his comparison with the Native Americans. So Pearl's role in the movie was definitely not as big as her role in the book. Like, in the movie, I would say she's more of an onlooker than an actual character. And the only way that I can see her embodying the Scarlet Letter is through her clothing. She wears red a lot, and I think that the movie kind of sees that as enough.
Yeah, in the book, she constantly reminds Hester that she's committed adultery, and she's Hester's punishment because she gives her this anxiety over the fact that she's this impish child, and society also sees her as a devil's child too, and um, they call her a product of sin, and they seem to truly believe that, or at least Hester sometimes really does believe that she's a demon, and that gives her a lot of fear, and it also reminds her about her crime. But that doesn't happen at all in the movie. She's
And I think that Pearl is more attached to the Scarlet Letter in the book than in the movie. Like, at the end of the movie, she's given the A, and she just tosses it aside, and they wheel over it in the wagon. And I don't feel like Pearl would have such disregard for that. Like, she, in the forest, going back to the forest, Pearl, when Hester doesn't have that letter on, Pearl isn't really able to recognize her. Like, she associates her mother with the letter, so to disregard the letter in such a careless fashion seems unrealistic. And I also think that how Pearl doesn't really have that big of a part in the movie is kind of contrasted with how Mistress Hibbins has a bigger role in the movie than the book, while Pearl has a bigger role in the book than the movie. So I think that's interesting how they're connected through that and through the search of the devil's mark on them, and they definitely have a connection.
in the book and the movie, the forest is portrayed as the sanctuary from civilization, and they're both places that are seen as like somewhat evil and a mystery to the Puritans. But in the novel, the forest plays a larger role by um, it's emphasized that the woods it is an evil place and is the home of the black man. And in the movie, it plays its significance by being the area where Hester and Dimmesdale meet, and where Hester and Dimmesdale can be together, but it's not as much of a scene as in it doesn't have as much of a bad stigma to it.
Right, it's more seen as like a place for freedom than as a bad place. Like, the book, like you said, definitely portrays it as evil, while the movie just portrays it as a place for freedom. Like, that's where Dimmesdale and Hester are able to be with each other and like kind of hidden, and that's why they're able to be with each other. That's where Hester sees Dimmesdale in the lake, and they're both sort of in that free state of mind. And then in the book, the place where I can see that most is again towards the end, where she finally is able to reveal Chillingworth's true identity. And I think that the forest in the movie is portrayed pretty well, because although it is different, there are definitely instances in both the book and the movie where it's seen as a place for freedom, and it's a place for Hester and Dimmesdale to communicate openly and freely. So that goes back to how Pearl is able, like, I think Pearl in the book is able to be more of herself there too, while in the movie she doesn't really have a big role. So does she even go into the forest?
Only when she's only with them, but there's nothing else. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't stop to play in the
Yeah, she doesn't like go off to herself and make her own little games like she does in the novel.
The crowd, the mob in the book has somewhat of ambiguous feelings about Hester in the beginning of the novel. Gossips say that she should be executed or that she should be whipped, but others point out that she feels guilt already for her crime and public shame is enough. And so we see that in the story it portrays Puritan society as more of how an actual society would be. There's not just one opinion, but in the movie it's more like the mob is more like a collective group that agrees solely that Hester is a bad person, and we can see this especially during the trial when Pearl's Scarlet Pearl's devil's mark, yeah, is shown, and the crowd is heckling and they demand her to be taken away from her.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't think that Pearl is part of the devil, then that's not shown at all. Like, the singular thought is completely drowned out by the meaning of the whole.
Yeah, it's almost like the movie is more of Hester versus the entire community.
Right. Right. And how in the movie the A is only seen as a bad thing. It only stands for adultery, and the rest of the other villagers, they only can see it to mean that she's bad. However, in the novel, the A is seen in the skies to be angel, and by the Native Americans, I think it's by the Native Americans, and probably the other townspeople too, as to mean able, as well as adulterer. But adulterer seems to be only what it means at the beginning of the novel, and then it evolves.
In the movie, we don't see the gradual transformation of Hester's mindset into a more independent thinker, and she doesn't change the meaning of the letter and show that she has power over it.
So that kind of goes into how Hawthorne's original idea was that his argument seems to be that punishment is sort of arbitrary, and it's not. It doesn't depend on the crime, but like it does depend on the crime and how it doesn't really always fit the crime.
The movie does sort of go into this by having Pearl say, "Who is to say what is a sin in God's eyes?" at the end of the story, but the main point of the entire movie seems to be that love conquers all, and there seems to be nothing much else.
Yeah, it sort of misses the mark, and Hawthorne, it's